Hello guys, welcome back to my channel Unspun Tales. History is filled with stories that sound unbelievable, and one of the most famous is the claim that Native Americans sold the island of Manhattan, the same Manhattan that today is home to Wall Street, Times Square, Central Park, and some of the most expensive real estate on Earth, for only $24 worth of goods. People repeat this story as if it were a joke, as if the Native Americans made the worst deal in history. But the truth behind this event is much deeper, more complicated, and far more interesting than the simple number we've all heard. To really understand what happened, we need to travel back nearly 400 years, to a time before the United States existed, before skyscrapers, and before millions of people called Manhattan home. Before Europeans ever stepped foot on the island, Manhattan was covered in thick forest, open meadows, freshwater streams, and wetlands. There were wolves, deer, bears, birds, and fish everywhere. The coastline was full of oysters and shellfish. This land was home to a Native American nation known as the Lenape, and they called the island Mannahatta, meaning land of many hills. The Lenape lived in villages and longhouses, hunted animals, fished, and grew crops like beans, squash, and corn. They lived in harmony with nature, seeing the land not as property, but as a living part of the world, something shared, respected, and never owned. To the Lenape, owning land permanently was like owning the sky or the ocean. It simply didn't make sense. This way of thinking will later become one of the biggest reasons the Manhattan trade was misunderstood. In the early 1600s, European ships began exploring the area. The Dutch were among the first to establish a presence, and they weren't immediately interested in conquering or building large cities. They were businessmen looking for profit, especially from beaver fur, which was valuable in Europe because it was used to make fashionable waterproof hats. The Dutch built trading posts and interacted peacefully with native tribes, exchanging goods like cloth and tools for fur. Eventually, in 1626, a man named Peter Minuit arrived representing the Dutch West India Company. His task was to manage the colony and establish a permanent Dutch settlement in the region. And this is where the famous Manhattan trade story begins. The only written record of the trade is a letter from 1626 saying that Manhattan was obtained for goods worth 60 guilders. Over 200 years later, someone tried to convert those 60 guilders into modern currency and estimated it as $24, and that number spread everywhere, school books, newspapers, and even museums. But that conversion was inaccurate. If we adjust the value of 60 guilders using different historical methods, modern estimates suggest the real amount could be anywhere from $1,000 to $30,000, or possibly even more if we consider the historical value of beaver fur. So the first big myth is already broken. Manhattan was never traded for just $24. But this brings us to a more important question. What was actually exchanged? The Dutch reportedly offered metal tools, cooking pots, knives, cloth, beads, and other goods that were common to Europeans. To the Lenape, these items weren't cheap trinkets. They were useful and valuable resources that made daily life easier. Metal tools could cut wood faster, help build homes, and improve hunting. From their point of view, the exchange was practical, not foolish. But while the objects exchanged matter, what matters even more is how each side understood the meaning of the trade. For the Dutch, land could be bought, owned, fenced, and controlled. To them, the trade meant, this land now belongs to us permanently. The Lenape, however, had a completely different understanding. Their culture had no concept of selling land forever. To them, accepting goods from the Dutch likely meant giving them permission to use the land, not surrender ownership of it. In other words, the Lenape may have thought they were agreeing to peacefully share the land, not give it away permanently. So what Europeans considered a permanent purchase, the Native Americans probably saw as a temporary arrangement or partnership. Two worlds, two languages, two belief systems, and one event interpreted in completely different ways. Adding another twist to the story, some historians believe the group the Dutch traded with didn't even have the authority to exchange the land. They may not have lived on Manhattan at all. They could have been a neighboring tribe passing through, or even a rival group. If true, this means the Dutch might have traded for land with people who simply didn't own it. Imagine someone selling your house while you're away, and the buyer thinking the paperwork is real. That possibility makes this moment in history even more complex. After the exchange, the Dutch began building their settlement, calling it New Amsterdam. They constructed homes, trading warehouses, farms, and even a defensive wall, later known as Wall Street. For a period of time, relations between the Dutch and Native Americans were peaceful, and trade continued. But as more Europeans arrived, everything began to change. The idea of shared land disappeared. Borders were drawn, laws were enforced, and access to land was controlled. Eventually, conflicts grew, sometimes violent, sometimes political, and the Lenape were gradually pushed away from their homeland. Not because of one bad trade, but because of an expanding colonial society that valued ownership, territory, and power. In 1664, the English took control of the colony from the Dutch and renamed it New York. Over the next few centuries, the population exploded, and Manhattan became one of the most important economic, cultural, and political centers in the world. Today, the island is worth trillions of dollars, making the original trade seem unbelievable. But the value of Manhattan today was impossible to predict then. So, was the trade unfair? From one modern perspective, yes, because comparing today's Manhattan to a bag of trade goods feels absurd. But from another perspective, the Lenape did not believe they were selling the land permanently. They were not tricked because they were unintelligent. They were misled because the two cultures did not share the same understanding of land, ownership, or permanence. The tragedy of the Manhattan trade is not the $24 myth. It's the miscommunication, the cultural difference, and the long-term consequences that followed. So, did Native Americans really sell Manhattan for $24? Not exactly. The number is inaccurate. The concept of a permanent sale didn't exist for them. And the story we often hear is a simplified version of a complex cultural encounter. The truth is deeper. It was not just a trade, it was the beginning of colonization and the reshaping of an entire continent. So now I'd love to hear from you. Do you see the trade as a mistake, a misunderstanding, or a symbol of something bigger? Comment below and share your thoughts. If you found this video interesting, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because there are many more stories just like this one waiting to be explored. Thank you for watching.